Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I've got a full review to do for you. It's actually way overdue. I have been done, frankly, with my review process on this knife for a while, but life gets crazy, and so I've just kept carrying it and enjoying it in the meantime to make sure it stays fresh in my mind. But this is the TRM Atom, and I got this knife because I wanted it. It's actually funny. So I got the TRM Neutron first, not because I wanted it more than the Atom, but just because I found one first. And even after I got the Neutron, I was fairly certain I needed to experience an Atom still. And so the second that I saw this one pop up, I jumped on it. The guy who I purchased this from actually happens to also be named Jake, but he did some work on it, as you'll see. All of the hardware has been heat anodized, and so it is bronze in color, and then he even did it to the thumb studs as well. He had to send it in to TRM to have them re-press fit those thumb studs back in. I thought that it was the only one in existence, but on Facebook someone sent me a picture of theirs that also has heat anodized hardware, including the thumb studs. So I am not alone in the world, even though I thought I was the only one with heat anodized thumb studs on a TRM Atom. Anyway, so this one is the OD Green Micarta. They do a number of different scale materials, and they also do at least two from what I've seen, scale shapes. Like the profile of the knife stays the same, but there's some that I believe they call their 3D machine scales, and those have kind of like a raised portion with some 3D milling in them. I haven't held or experienced those scales, but I've really liked these, to be honest. Yeah, maybe eventually I'll get another set of scales. We'll see. I really like OD Green Micarta, so I've had no real reason to switch these. One thing that's a little bit funny, you'll see from side to side on this knife, oh man, these flies. The finishing on the micarta on the side that touches my body when I sweat has gotten kind of cleaned by my sweat, believe it or not. And then this side is more like oil soaked, which is just, it's a little bit funny that you can see like one side looks drier than the other. I'm sure I could scrub this other side off and make it also clean, but it is what it is. So this is basically kind of the big brother to the Neutron. I've already reviewed the Neutron. I love the Neutron. This is essentially a very similar knife in terms of like, before I owned TRMs, if I saw photos of them, I wasn't usually sure which one it was, and even still it can kind of throw me for a loop, especially on certain angles when you just see the profile of the knife, because the profile it's almost identical. Where they get a little bit different is the pocket clip, which TRM is about to launch some deep carry pocket clips for the Neutrons finally, which is really, really cool. I think the new Neutrons they'll be making is actually going to have slightly different clip placement as well to accommodate for their new deep carry clips, but they'll make a deep carry clip that'll go on the existing ones as well. So that's exciting, because one of the reasons why I like the Atom better than the Neutron objectively, that's hard for me to even say. I feel like I'm giving a slide to the Neutron when I say that, and I love the Neutron so much, but part of why I've preferred this just a little bit is because it does have the deep carry clip, and I like that this deep carry clip functions so well, that it's placed so well. I like that it goes right to the butt of the knife. It's a very good thing to me. So the other differences besides the deep carry clip are basically that this has nested liners and then the size. So on the Neutron, it's just like a more typical liner lock where the scale, the liner doesn't nest into the scale. It's not internally milled to house it. So the liner comes all the way out to the edge and you can see it all the way through the knife. This, they're nested in there. They're set inside like a PM2 or a Para 3. And I like this better too as a construction. Philosophically, I think this is better than the Neutron's construction. But the advantage to the way that the Neutron is constructed, actually I think it's about as easy here, but the Neutron scales are super easy to swap. I think they're just as easy to swap here, but they're also super cheap on the Neutron. Scales for these are more expensive because they're internally milled and they're bigger, it's more material and yada yada yada. The Neutron, if you want to get different sets of scales, like real TRM scales from TRM, they are really inexpensive. So you can take your one knife that you get and make it feel like a couple different knives for pretty cheap by just taking the 2 seconds to swap the scales with a T6 Torx driver, and that's all you need. So that's really cool about that model. But this, they're also easy to swap from what I understand. I haven't swapped these, but from what I've seen, it's essentially the same process. And other than that, I mean, they're just more expensive, but they're more intricate. So I'll let that be what that's going to be. So yeah, both the Neutron and this are CPM 20 CV blade steel, which from what I have heard and what I've seen tested thus far is done very well at TRM. You've got liners, barrel spacers, a pocket clip. It's a fairly simple construction, but I was actually having an interesting conversation with my buddy Jason from the Millie PM2 Para 3 Club the other day, because he's borrowing my Neutron right now. He hadn't experienced a TRM knife yet, so I sent it to him for him to check out, and he commented pretty quickly on something that I've said in my own way a number of times, that it feels like a small batch, kind of like mid-tech. Like, there's production elements to it, but he was even like showing me in a little clip while he was kind of turning the knife over in his hands, like the edges on the micarta of the Neutron seem like they got some hand sanding, and they very well may have, knowing TRM. And all of their knives just have this inherent sensation to them that's hard to quantify into words, but they feel more special than a typical production knife. It feels like it was made in small numbers by people who care and who are into it here in the US. And that's exactly what happened, because the people behind TRM, every interaction I have with them, they're phenomenal. Such nice people, such kind people. They're great. And the knives they make are fantastic. I have the Neutron, I have this, I now have their field action fixed blade, which is pretty cool. I like their folders better, if I'm being totally honest, but that fixed blade is cool as well, and it's very well made. But yeah, I think the Atom is probably my favorite of their offerings that I've experienced thus far. It's just the size, the shape, the thinness. It's not quite as thin as a Neutron, but it's also bigger in general. But for this size, being like roughly the same overall size as a paramilitary 2, it's just very thin. And the way that it makes it carry, for how much blade and cutting performance you get out of this 20 CV that's just really, really thin and an excellent EDC grind, it's great. I'm floored with how well it performs. Every time I pull this knife out to do an EDC task with it. This isn't a bruiser outdoor knife for me. I'm not chopping wood or feather sticking or doing anything crazy. I'm opening boxes and cutting zip ties and maybe cutting some cord here and there. Like, I'm doing normal EDC stuff with this. For those types of tasks, it just does great. It's ground thinner behind the edge than my PM2 is. The profile of the blade, the way that the tip works, it's all very intuitive. And it's funny because for a while, when I started to see TRM get a bunch of hype behind them, I aesthetically just wasn't pleased with their knives and the way that they look. I didn't find them that attractive. And I still don't, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think that this design looks great. It's got this like kind of strange, like the whole thing is like a curve this way, and then the handle shape I don't think looks all that appealing. The blade shape isn't exciting, but the way it all comes together to actually be a usable knife, like the more I carry it and use it, I find myself liking it more and more and more and more over time. And then the looks start to grow on me because I like so much about how it actually works. And that happens from time to time with knives. Like the Spidey Chef is a knife that I don't think is classically beautiful, but the way that the Spidey Chef goes in my hand and performs and cuts and how pleasant it is to carry, now when I look at it, I'm like, ooh, I like the Spidey Chef. You know, it has that effect of growing on you. And I don't know, I'm sure some people look at these and right off the bat, they're like, ooh, that's one of the best looking knives I've ever seen. That's all a very subjective conversation to have, right? But for me, if I'm being totally honest, these looks kind of had to grow on me. But yeah, I adore so much about this design and how intuitive it is to hold, to carry, to use. I love that they didn't mess around with any jimping on the entire knife. other than at the lock bar relief, just right there where you disengage the lock, there is the littlest bit of jimping so that you get traction on the lock bar to go ahead and close it. I like the action on this knife. As thumb stud knives go for deployment, this one is just a breeze. It runs on washers and it glides, and the detent is tuned well. It's not too light, it's not too heavy. It's just like every element of this knife, when you get close to it, is just very well done by people who care. And I don't know, it really does just kind of shine through in that way. I think that's the biggest takeaway I have from TRM knives in general. And I'm curious to see as they get bigger and bigger and as they keep growing in favor and expanding their lineup. I mean, there is serious demand for their products at this point. I'm intrigued to see how well they keep that sensation up in their knives. In 5 years, if I buy a new TRM knife, are they going to feel more like a production knife then? I hope that they can hold on to this. That's my sincere hope for them, that they can keep this sensation in their knives, this kind of small batchiness that comes through in them. One thing I mentioned in my first impressions video of this knife that there were a couple comments that were a little bit negative about, and I think may have been taken the wrong way. Maybe I verbalized it wrong. But one of the things I mentioned was, for what you get out of this knife, materials-wise, country of origin specifically, and like just everything that happens to get this into the consumer's hands, these are very competitively priced. And there's a pretty good indicator as to whether a manufacturer could ask more for a knife. Oftentimes, I would think logically, is whether they consistently go for a lot more on the secondary market. And these pretty consistently go for more on the secondary market than what TRM charges new. The reason partially why that happens is because they can't make enough of them for the demand. So I get that it's a little bit more complex than just like, if they're going for 300 on the secondary, sell them for 300, and then it's not always that way. But the point I was trying to make then, and that I want to reiterate now, is that TRM could charge more for these than they currently are, and I'm very confident they would still sell just as many. I don't think they'd have problems moving this knife at $300 a knife for their basic Atom. And they don't cost that much. They're significantly less than that. I happened to buy this one on the secondary, like I said, and I was lucky to get a pretty good deal on it. All things considered, I paid, it wasn't that much more than $200, if I remember right. So I'm so happy with the amount of knife I got for that amount of money. And there are other knives out there, some of which I've reviewed and some of which I've pointed out, feel to me like, for the materials you're getting, for the amount of design and workmanship and all of those tangibles or intangibles that go into the knife, even other US made knives where I do add value in my head for it being made in the US with US materials by people here, that's all fine and dandy. There are other knives that to me just have way less of a value proposition. This, I mean, for just north of $200, this is one of the best knives that you can get if you're buying something that is made in the US in CPM 20 CV and micarta. And I mean, it's a solid list of materials made by solid people in the most solid country. Like, it's great that they don't charge more than they do, because I really think they could, and it shows their integrity too. I think that they're trying to be fair and do a good thing for the community by offering their really great knives at a good value. So kudos to them for being that type of company. And I'm not the first person to toot their horn. There are a lot of other reviews on YouTube where people always seem to mention that TRM as a company is filled with good people, and that makes it feel better to have one of their knives. It really does. If there's a maker who I really just can't stand, even if his knife is phenomenal, I'm much less likely to want it. So this knife happens to be phenomenal standing on its own 2 feet, but it's also made by phenomenal people. So I'll let that be what that's going to be. Overall, I really love the Atom. That has to be my review of it, is that I think it's great. I love the ergos for how thin it is. Not the best knife ergonomically I've ever held, but For the thinness, it's very comfortable. The edges are all knocked down. There's not jimping anywhere where it shouldn't be. Like, it's just ergonomically, it's a very nice knife to hold on to. It carries exceptionally well because it's thin, because it has a good deep carry clip that's placed in the right place. It's great in that way. The action is fun. It's not the most fidgety knife ever. That's not what they're going for, but it's great. It rides really well on these washers, and it's fun to play with, and it deploys reliably, it locks up reliably, it's easy to close, it's easy to operate one-handed, all of that's great. And then the blade is just, it is a very, very good blade for actual use. Is it the best, most ultimate blade that could ever be conceived? I don't know, probably not. Again, it's kind of a like, for what? I feel like for what this knife is designed to be, a kind of all-around EDC knife. It's very good at EDC tasks. It's funny, I got a comment, this is pertinent, the other day on my Benchmade 940 review, and it was somebody mentioning that the 940 is meant to be a jack of all trades, and that is its shining feature, is that it sucks at everything. And I'm being harsher than I actually even was in the review of it, but I'm paraphrasing. He was defensive of the positioning of the Benchmade 940 and that it's supposed to be such an all-arounder. I would posit that this is a way better all-arounder than a Benchmade 940 for EDC tasks. For the tasks that both of these knives are designed to be able to handle objectively, this is actually really good at all of those tasks. It's not just acceptable at them. Whereas the 940, it's way thicker behind the edge than this is. It doesn't carry any better than this is. It just overall, like the construction, the ergos, the way that that knife performed for me, this is objectively much, much better. I prefer it tenfold. It's very, very good. So anyway, that'll be my full review. The Atom is better than a 940. No, it's just a very, very good knife, and I appreciate it a lot. I like the people at TRM, so I'm really, really stoked that I've been able to experience this one, and it's a knife that I can get behind and I can recommend without any hesitation.